Welcome, everybody. This is I'll call to order and announce this is the meeting of the House Higher Education Committee. I can't see the monitors, but when I was walking in, I think we were trying to be Chairman Jasper's Education Committee for a minute. This is higher education. We welcome everybody today. Our agenda this afternoon calls for a hearing on Representative Belton's bill. We have a substitute HB 736 LC 490102S that we'll hear this afternoon. This will be a hearing only on the bill. We want to sound it out and allow additional input. Representative is still working on that. If there's nothing pressing before the committee before we get started, we'll move on in our agenda. Seeing none, Representative Belton, you may present from your seat or standing, whichever you wish. You are a pilot, are you not? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, I'm a pilot. Yes, sir. I do sit actually quite a bit. Thank you. I would take the left seat today. I really appreciate your patience and the committee and the chairmen for hearing this bill. This is a bold idea. This is not a little bill. This is actually kind of a bold idea. I will say, I've passed almost a dozen bills into law, and I've gotten more media attention on this bill than I ever have before, and all the others combined. I had the honor of the mayor. Lance Bottoms actually tweeted about this bill yesterday. So it has a lot of attention, and I included a couple of different articles that have been written about this bill. I'm not even saying this is my idea either. The actual idea of this came from the Teacher Advisory Committee that was rendered by Chairman Amy Carter, who you probably remember. This is her idea, actually. So this is just something that is trying to move forward with that excellent idea. So I don't really want to talk about, what I really want to talk about is workforce development. I don't know if y'all were the Appropriations Committee, they talked about the fact that the revenues were not climbing the way we want them to, and the economist from the governor's office was asked, why is revenue kind of leveling out? He said, well, we have super low unemployment. Well, that's great. That's awesome. And then a senator asked, so what can we do to increase revenue? And this is what the state economist said. He said, the best thing we could do to improve revenue is to invest in education. Now, super low unemployment, that is awesome, and you should all be very, very proud. Your leadership has created the best record of job growth in Georgia history. But super low unemployment does have a problem. The problem is, how does a company or a state continue to grow when there are no available workers to do the work? Well, actually, we do have a lot of available workers. We have 162,000 Georgians who are unemployed right now, currently looking for work, but are not qualified to do the work that needs to be done. In November alone, 70,000 jobs were added, but only 10,000 workers who can actually do the jobs. The Chamber of Commerce have talked about this a lot. It's hard to believe right now that the job openings, 10 openings every day for everyone qualified to do the work. Let me say that again. So there's 10 openings for every worker who's qualified to do that job. So what we need to do is to have more qualified workers. The only way you can do that is education. And as you know, most of these people who are not employed are basically they're not as educated as they were. And a lot of these people are in these there's rural areas and also some of these physically deprived areas. Last year, there were 3,112 teaching positions that went vacant because no one would go into those positions. On this committee alone, there's almost 2,000 of those in committees in counties that y'all represent. Georgia, even we've done some great stuff with education. There's no question, but we're one of the worst, 10 worst in the nation in having teacher vacancies, where we could not find a teacher to fill that position. Now, you, as a Georgia legislation, you have the best record on education. Right now, we fully funded the QBE for the first time 2 years in a row. That's awesome. 55% of our budget goes to education, and we've added a lot of money lately to education, and the rewards is it improved scores. We're now 13th best in the nation AP scores. ACT scores are above the national average for 2 years in a row. How many of y'all remember about 20 years ago, Georgia was the lowest, number 50 on the SAT? Y'all remember that 20 years ago? Now we're above the national average on the SAT, believe it or not. And the graduation rate is skyrocketed 18 points, 28% to a record high 82%. And our K-12 scores are the 12th best in the nation. So we're doing amazing things. But of course, as you know, some of the people are not being, are not capturing. We have a lot of great schools, but there's a lot of schools that are not doing so well. So this bill is targeted towards the schools that are not doing well. Another thing I want to talk about is this. Believe it or not, there's 2.5 million children in Georgia. That's almost 1 in every 4 persons in Georgia is a child that is either being educated or yet to be educated. So the number of kids is going up, but the teacher enrollment is going down 20% every year as the number of children escalate. 44% of the new teachers leave before completing 5 years. And as I said, last year there was 3,112 positions that weren't filled at all. So what I'm trying to do here is do a loan forgiveness program. It applies only to the lowest performing schools, basically the turnaround eligible schools, not the turnaround schools, but the turnaround eligible schools and the most rural schools. That's a universe of about 325 schools. I'd like to forgive $55,000 a year for a maximum of 5 years in a row per teacher. I require a 5-year commitment to one of these eligible schools. It'd be first come, first run basis to be paid out. And what I'm asking for, and there's no question I'm asking for money here, I'm asking for 1,000 teachers to start off with. So 1,000 teachers maximum. So it would, $1,000, 1,000 teachers times $5,000 per teacher would be a maximum of $5 million a year. And again, so that's what I'm asking for. So I'll take the questions from there. How about that?
Pardon me. Questions. You have to help me out here for number 15. I'm just going to call I mean, no disrespect, but I don't know which number goes with. Is it
No
you,
worries.
Representative Benton?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Belton, for your work on this legislation. But my question is relating to how would this impact, or if this should become law, how do we get the current teachers to understand that they are not a part of this? How do we address teachers that are currently working and struggling to pay for their student loans?
Well, that's a great question, and if you want, you could say, well, this is a terrible bill because I don't include everyone. I'm trying to include an incentive for our young minds in college to come do this hard work. But you're right. We do have a 1-year pullback, as I recall. Let's see here. But there's no question. Some teachers would already be in that school and not be getting this money. That's true. And then that would cause an inequity, if you want to call it that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for presenting this bill. I think it's a really good idea. I'm just struggling a little bit with the execution.
Sure.
So the question is how we're going to make work. The first question I have, we're saying that this applies to, and I had a different copy of this. Yeah, so I think on the third page, it talks about teachers who have a bachelor's degree. And we only want to do it for students who have a bachelor's degree, or would the loan forgiveness also apply for people who move on with a master's degree? So if we, for example, have teachers who have a master's degree, have outstanding loan on a master's degree, but then decide they want to go to one of those turnaround schools.
The way I read this, and what I've done is, if they have a certificate for a teacher and they have a debt, even if it was a debt that it was relating to an education degree, then they would be able to qualify for this if they were willing to go to one of these schools. And that's what I'm trying to do, really. It's trying to get teachers to willing to volunteer to teach at one of these very difficult schools, either because it's very rural and it's people don't want to move there for whatever reason, or because it's one of these turnaround eligible schools.
May I follow up with one more question? And this applies only to teachers who have graduated from Georgia schools and have Georgia outstanding loans.
That's right. And lines like 27 through, we talked about the University System of Georgia, or an independent or private university located in Georgia eligible to be deemed as an approved school as defined by paragraph 2 of code section. So these are not the fly-by-night, the Phoenix. You can't get an online course with like Phoenix or those other online. It has to be an approved, accredited private school. It has to be in Georgia.
And considering the amount of teachers we would like to have, would it be considerable? Could it be an option that we extend, if we could pass this law, that we would extend it to teachers who graduated out of state?
We consider that, and I'm willing to do whatever the committee desires. In my opinion, we want to promote Georgia schools. I like
Yeah.
Georgia schools, but I'm not opposed to that suggestion.
I'm just thinking of lack of teachers, eligible teachers. So
Sure.
if we, especially for struggling schools. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We have some more questions. I want to interject something, if I may. I want to ask the question. You're talking about up to 1,000 teachers, so your initial ask would be for 1,000 times 5,000, $5 million. How many are you aware of? How many openings there might be that fit the definition? If you don't have that right now,
I do.
we can-
It's over 2,000.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that just gives the committee an idea of the openings that we're trying to fill. And then I've talked with the representative about this, and this is not, I'll let him opine if he wishes to concur or if he differs in my opinion. I think there's two things going on here is the loan forgiveness, but the primary wish, I believe in the gentleman's bill, is to fill these positions. And while this is not your education appropriation, and you see Chairman Knight at 3 o'clock
Right.
About that, is I would entertain language, or it would seem to be reasonable to entertain language, to make this an additional amount of money that we would pay for that period of time. Because if Dr. Clark and I are coming and I have a loan and Dr. Clark doesn't, it's just as important for you to bring your teaching and professionalism to that classroom as it is to me. But I would be getting an extra benefit, and $5,000 of my loan would be repaid each year. Dr. Clark may have paid for her education as she went, but if we're trying to, we could both go to that school for the same reason. I would be getting additional dollars, you would not. So the question at that point becomes, are we interested in helping with loans, or are we interested in getting more professional educators to the classroom? So you don't have to comment on that, but as the committee thinks and asks questions, I'd be interested for your feedback on that, because there are two things there. Is this a loan repayment plan, or is this a plan to try to get educators into schools that need them? Going on, number 25. Chairman Dickey.
And you set that up very well, and that's exactly what my it's a very good bill. And we definitely have needs in these low performing schools for better teachers, for teachers. I know in rural areas and even urban areas, it's getting these new teachers to in those positions. But it is a concern of mine, and I was wondering how many teachers come out of school that have loans and how many that doesn't. Have we got any feedback along the chairman's line? How
I know
many-
the average student that graduates from a Georgia school comes out with $27,000 in debt. That's the average statewide. So that's why I kind of did 25,000 as a round figure. But I don't know specifically if
Yeah.
these people. What I'm hoping is that the teacher pipeline is shrinking at the university system in Georgia. That's just a fact. And it's because a lot of reasons. It's a hard job to do. There's no question. It doesn't pay a lot. Teachers are the most educated people who are paid the least amount for the education
Yeah.
that they have. So, so to me, I want other folks to go, I got a lot of debt. I want to be a good teacher and go towards that route. But just and try it out.
Mr. Chairman, could I follow up real quick? And along the chairman's line, I'm not so sure. I'm thinking maybe give some slots in the funding to the schools to give to teachers when they have needs of trying to recruit, as you know, as another tool in their toolbox to recruit teachers. You kind of, this loan forgiveness sounds good and all, but it would be some sort of supplement, in my mind, thinking it is as a supplement.
Yeah.
If you do that, it would be, you'd have some teachers there making 5,000 or whatever amount more than the other one side by side. So that's a little
I'd be
bit
open to
I'm
that.
trying to get in my mind.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, to follow up then, we have a number of questions. I'll be brief. One of the reasons that I suggest that is in getting new teachers, new out of school by that, when I say new, is important. But if in some of these areas, you may want also to recruit experienced teachers into that area, and they may have already paid their loans. And that was the reason I suggest that we might want to do that. All right, we have a bit of a Christmas tree here, so I'm going to start at the end down there. Number 29, is that Representative Wiedauer? 29?
Can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. So if a teacher teaching now goes back and gets their master's, they then become eligible if they were to move to a rural school?
That's how I read it. Is that right, Mr. Walker? That's right. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Like your haircut, by the way.
You want to join the haircut?
We've had pictures already, actually.
Thank you very much. I think we should do whatever we can to try to get excellent teachers in the schools where the kids need high-performing teachers. This feels a little complicated to me, and I understand you were trying to get away from the opposition to paying certain teachers more. But I think we ought to put the value on an experienced teacher getting additional pay. So I think I'm sort of hearing what the choir up here is saying, is that we think this is an important issue, but I believe it would be better to keep it a little simplified. But I understand you're trying to get something that will pass. So
Yes, ma'am.
I really congratulate you for doing it, but
Thank you.
I would
And
urge
again-
you to think about it another
Again,
way.
nationwide, we talk a lot about student debt. That's an issue we talk about quite a bit.
Note for the record, Representative Gardner and I, or the local Fulton County delegation, are agreeing on this this morning, it would appear.
What we know is we agree on many things.
Yes, ma'am. I was making note of that. Yes, ma'am. Number 26, I don't know, do we skip? Yes, ma'am. Representative Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is an exciting way to address some of our needs in rural schools. I would hope that a teaching student who graduated from a Georgia school would be extremely qualified, and I would hope that an at-risk school would be excited to have a teacher applicant. I'm curious what the administration of this looks like. We're talking about promising a graduate a position in one of these schools if they're willing to take it. What does that do to remove local control from that administration to make a decision about who they're hiring? How does that get facilitated tactically on the ground?
Tactically, and I have Mr. Chris Green's going to talk to this about, but we're going to have the Georgia Student Finance Authority handle the situation, and we're just going to say, and what I asked for in the bill is 1,000 teachers, but whatever y'all decide on, if it passes at all, and it'd be first come first served basis to get those.
Let me just try to interject. I believe what the representative, there's nothing in your bill that says this is a guarantee, that the school system has to hire somebody. They still have to go get the job if they get that's the way I understand and read the bill. And I think that was the representative's question. So you're not saying that you get out of here, you get this guarantee from student finance, and therefore you go to work in X county. We're not telling them they have to hire these students. We're saying if you have a match, then this should it
right.
pass and should it be funded, would do that. And I think that was the young lady's concern, that we were trying to tell them who they had to hire, and that's not the intent. That's a great point.
That
That's
answers
a
my
great
question.
point.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
We're gonna.
Thank you, Chairman.
Gonna go back down here to the end. Yes, sir, Representative Dubnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you 13?
13.
Oh, I'm sorry. I turned on Dr. Clark there. We're gonna turn her on next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Belton, thank you for bringing this. So just to I may be getting way too deep in the weeds too early, but this is a 5-year commitment from that teacher to that school system, correct?
That's right.
All right,
And that teacher will be still in that school, even if that school did not cease to become a turnaround eligible school. So let's say the school's performance got better, we would not pull the teacher out or the funds out. But that teacher would be dedicated to that school. That's
well,
right.
you're reading my mind, and
Okay.
yes, that was my question. So, and again, maybe too many weeds here,
No, that's
too
good.
deep. But I commit to move to X city. I'm there for 5 years. I've moved my family, and 2 years in, the school is off the list, if you will.
Then they continue to get the funds for the 5 years.
What is the requirement of the 5-year commitment to get the 5 years? Is it, I hate to be blunt, but is it I move and if I work a day and they're off the list,
They don't get the money until after the year's over. They get $5,000 per year after the end of the completion of that school year.
but do I get all 5 years if I move and take and earn the job to Chairman Martin's point? So I move, I work a year, you forgive $5,000, the school's off the list. I committed to be here 5 years. Do I have to stay?
Yes, if you want the money, yeah, because you committed to that school. That's right.
But the money would still be available
Yes.
up to the 5 years.
The way it's written now.
Perfect. Okay. That answers my question. Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Good
Dr.
question.
Clark.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Doctor.
How are you?
Very good.
Okay, so my question actually has to do with just technical, tiny details. So it mentions that it's for rural schools or turnaround eligible schools. Are you aware of any turnaround eligible schools, maybe in the more metro Atlanta area?
Most of
where
them are
this
metro.
Would be, this would take, because, and so I guess the question is, how are we going to distribute these teachers, or how are these teachers going to be distributed? Is there any formulation that says at least this many needs to go to rural areas versus staying in the metro area, so that we don't, or so that the people in the rural area don't feel like, oh, we signed on to this and we still didn't get any teachers, or the people in the metro area are like, I thought this was something that was going to help our school, and y'all just sent all the teachers out of the metro area to the rural parts of the state, and we're still having an issue of filling vacancies.
So the universe, that's a good question, Doctor. The universe we've talked about is 325 schools as the bill is written right now. 105 of those schools are the turnaround schools. A dozen turnaround schools are in rural areas, but the rest are actually in the Atlanta area. The other 220 schools are in rural areas, the way it's written right now. There is nothing in the bill that says what you're talking about, but I'm happy to include that if that's the will of the committee.
And can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, ma'am.
So a rural school could be performing well and have vacancies, and a teacher would be eligible to get this. And a school that is not performing well might not get teachers because they ended up going to a rural area.
That's possible. And to be fair, I'm not talking about all rural schools. I'm talking about the most distantly rural schools. It's a 225 schools. They're most distant. And I will say, I do know for a fact that for the Department of Education that this is talking about, they had 2,115 vacancies in the schools I'm talking about right now. That's the Department of Education is saying. So, but you're correct. A rural school theoretically could be a very well-performing rural school and still get this bonus. You know.
We have a number of other questions. Just if I might on Dr. Clark's points, I think there's at least two things we've identified thus far, and that's why we have a hearing here. But besides the fact that funding has to go hand in hand with this, I think there's a couple of things here. Representative Dubnik brought up, if you move and you start, then the question would be, so if you leave after 1 year, is there a clawback? Not decided on, spoken to. That's a policy decision to go through. Or if it is spoken to, Representative Belton, it's one I think that is, this committee would want to look over. Then there's the issue of exactly how to put the program together. Is it loan only? Is it, each teacher? And then you bring up another question of how they're distributed. These are policy issues that this is a good idea to get more, professional educators, high-quality educators in schools that need them. And those are at least 2 or 3 things that I think we need to refine, and that's the reason we're hearing it and sounding it off this committee, because we have 25 members and a well-educated author on the subject to work the legislation as we're going forward. Number 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the gentleman, the question that has not been asked yet, how much does it cost Georgia Student Finance Authority to administer this program? Because I'm assuming that there will be additional costs actually in administering, have someone to look over it. Do you?
I don't know the answer to the question, but I do know that Mr. Green is here to talk about that issue.
Okay. One of the other questions, if I could, Mr. Chairman, or you need to roll on? Okay. The chairman mentioned high-quality teachers. We've mentioned high-performing teachers. We've mentioned better teachers. And we're looking at schools that really need, they need someone to step in the gap and not just fill a seat, but fill a seat and make the student reach beyond what they've been reaching, and visionaries. And there's nothing in this bill about. I know there are some good farmers in my neck of the woods. There are some poor farmers in our neck of the woods. There are some good doctors. We've got some bad doctors. Let's assume that there might be some good teachers, and there could be bad teachers that are coming fresh. There's nothing in this bill that rewards quality. Am I correct?
Well, the local school board rewards quality. I would say the local school board, if they didn't like that teacher, they don't have to bring him back. I mean, that's easy.
If they have 6 vacancies and they've got to have somebody there, and perhaps a warm body might be better but that's.
Actually, Kelsey Hernandez is my aide, and she mentioned the fact that she had a coach come, and the coach was coaching football or whatever, and the coach said, well, now you need to teach physical education, physical sciences for 9th grade. Now you need to teach the computer science over here. Now you need to teach. Teachers are being asked to teach all kinds of things all the time. We know for a fact we have 3,112 teachers vacancies, and we cannot fill. And so that's what I'm trying to do here.
Well, if we can move along, again, another thing to talk about here, I don't think anything in your bill is trying to tell a teacher that if they get in this slot and they're recruited to this slot, they make a match, they become eligible for this. If their contract is not renewed at that school for reasons unrelated to this bill, we need to put in this language that their deal goes away.
That's right.
We're
I
not
believe that's
trying
the
to lock
language
you.
is in there
So
already.
we have that, again, the reason we're here in the bill today, we have some things to work. Let's get the rest of the questions going back now. Chairman Jaspers.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank Chairman Belton. It's always hard when you get a sub and you looked at the original and just kind of ferret through a few things. Is this in any way limit a school system from hiring what they need? I guess I'm specifically asking about, technical or CTAE teachers. Are they included in this?
Everyone's included.
So no matter what, it's just dependent on their need. Okay. One thing that someone down here brought up, many teachers that come in as first-year teachers have maybe a BS or BA in some other subject. This bill really limits it only to the BS or BA and not someone who comes and gets a master's, Mr. Chairman, that comes in and get a master's of education in their first year of teaching. I think there's a lot of folks, I know most of our higher ed schools have those, and we need to address that they are included in this also. Chairman Belton, this is like getting in the weeds, but when we talk about we talk about rural areas twice on line 34 and 41. If I understand that right, that takes out or eliminates the metro area totally. On line 34 and then line 40. Unless I don't understand the definition of rural area, we talk about it's more than 5 miles from the nearest urbanized area. And so that to me eliminates any metropolitan school system from being able to take part in this. That's something that needs to be looked at. You know,
Well,
that's-
there was the turnaround eligible was in there before. I know
well, that's
they-
on line 34, you know, where it says it qualifies, but is in a rural area.
Or that state qualifies, yeah, on line 35, is the-
Well, I'm just getting at, you're in 40, we define a rural territory as somewhere that's, and territory is a new word to me in Georgia, I've seen it used much, but 5 miles from the nearest urbanized area and more than 2.5 miles from the nearest urban cluster. We need to ferret that. I think it needs to be a little looked at, because that really, if I see it right, eliminates any urban area. Maybe I'm wrong.
Again, we've got a sub to, I think if we read later in the bill, what the gentleman said is he was a teacher that is at a qualifying public school, which is defined in line 34, or in a rural territory. So I believe he's trying to, it could be either one of those.
Okay.
So it wouldn't necessarily be any school in an urban area. It would only be a school that would be a qualifying public school as a turnaround if you were in an urban area. But point
Yeah, like I said,
made,
we're trying to
point made, and
work this issue out.
we'll refine and make sure we're doing it.
in the language I used about the rural territory is from the Department of Education, from the United States Department of Education terminology.
I think, and we normally talk about Rural Development Council, you know, a county less than 50,000 is normally what we look at. This is why I just wonder why we use that. And can we talk about tuition? Does that include, or I think the original bill said it was just tuition only that a student, so now you're including any debt that a student may have.
In speaking with the, that's a good question, Chairman. In speaking with the Georgia Student Finance Authority, they said that trying to sparse out what kind of debt it was would be very difficult for them. They'd just rather talk about loans, period, but not try to go into what how they got the loan, how they got the debt.
Okay.
But we can add that back in if you care to.
Let's see. So that, the verifiable outstanding balance, so that's what we're going to there. And I'd love to see a map, Chairman Belton, on where the,
I have a list of schools that would actually impact. The Department of Education has given me a list of which actual schools it would be. So, but it's not all rural schools, to be fair. It's the most rural schools, as in the most distantly rural.
We have the technology, Chairman
Okay.
Jaspers, we can get somebody in
Okay.
GIS to put those schools up on a map that we can put. We can look at a heat map of those.
okay, just
Good
lastly,
idea.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
if I
sir.
can, you know, in the original bill, you know, you really, I thought very accurately, I like where it talked about high demand subject areas, and that's absent from this substitute.
Yes, sir. Again, we can add that back in if that's the will of the committee. I have another bill talking about teacher retirement in retirement, and I use only STEAM which is high demand. If you want to add that back in, we certainly can. I'm trying to. It's the will of the committee.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Chairman Belton, for bringing this bill.
Thank
I
you.
like the way that you think outside the box.
Thank you.
This is a recruiting tool,
That's
as
right.
I see it.
That's right.
Not uncommon in the private industry. Corporations use this type of technique all the time. You know, I had 4 children that attended Georgia Public Universities. All 4 graduated with a Hope Scholarship. 2 of the 4 ended up going to work for companies that had a student loan payback program. And their student loans were not very sizable, but it was certainly a recruiting tool that they utilized. So I like the way that you're making that translation to this sort of public environment.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, just on the practical application of the loan, is it a loan payback? Is it a loan forgiveness? I'm trying to understand how that actually is applied. And I would think, for example, let's say you've got a student that has $15,000 worth of student loan debt, FAFSA. I see here you're saying that the loan payback program does not cover books, fees, or living expenses, right? So what?
The substitute, we took that language out.
You did take that language out. Okay, just wanted to be sure. So it's would cover all of those things, and then any extraneous expenses not covered by the HOPE. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And are we back to Representative Cash?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Just one thought. We all agree that the problem is that we have public schools that desperately need teachers. And I really appreciate the way you try to address this with simultaneously addressing our student loan crisis. My question is, when you thought about the bill and talked to the universities, was there ever a thought that goes into the equal treatment of people that need loans and those that don't need loans? Was there ever a thought addressing this recruiting tool on an earlier stage while these kids are still in school, for example, through a tuition grant? I mean, if we spend $5 million anyway, and those $5 million are being spent for the benefit of Georgia students coming from Georgia schools, I think overall, like, maybe I'm seeing this wrong. It doesn't matter where we get them, how we do this, but when we spend it. But if we, for example, could give a tuition incentive for students to actually say, if you commit to this, and I don't know how that would be structured. Was there any discussion about that before? So that would actually take care of the equal treatment or.
Equal treatment is in the income of the student or the student's parents. Is that what you're saying?
We said in this draft, the problem is that we may give preference. By the way, I question whether there is preference for students who commit to going into turnaround schools. To those students who don't need or have the benefit of not having a student loan. So there's a difference, because this would only benefit students who have loans. But if our goal is to get qualified teachers into the schools, wouldn't it make more sense to provide the incentive to go into those schools at an earlier point, basically saying you have to pay less when you become a teacher if you commit to spend this amount of time in critical schools? I'm just asking if there was a discussion like that before.
That's a great idea. I did not think about that. My thing was, there's a lot of student debt out there. It's a big issue out there on the national scale. And to be honest with you, I got this idea from Chairman Amy Carter. She's the one who talked about this in this teacher advisory committee report that she did a couple years ago. So that's where I got this idea. So that's a good idea.
Thank you, Chairman Bell. And I think one thing, Representative, to your point, you have to be a bit careful. The idea is good, but a bit careful when you apply this. I believe Representative Belton is after getting professional educators to these schools now. Offering this money to somebody that's going into the University of Georgia or Georgia Southern or, Clayton State University to become an educator that would be available 4 years from now is not. We're going to apply this money to try to get people into schools next fall and then the next year, as opposed to 4 years out. The thing you bring out could be a dual path thing, and I certainly understand that. But I believe that's as we started the discussion, why I wanted to prompt the discussion over: is this about loan repayment, or is this about getting more professional educators into these areas where they're needed for the students? And if so, not just new teachers, not just new professional educators, but experienced ones that may or may not still have debt, but to get them in. So, that too is an additional way to get things over. We don't have any. You have done well. We don't have that. So I'm going to move now to anyone that wishes to speak to the item. This is not, don't feel like you have to speak in support or opposition to, but if you just have thoughts on our bill before us this afternoon. Any speakers that signed up, please?
I'll speak from the podium if that's all right. My name is Josh Stevens. I represent the Professional Association of Georgia Educators. We represent over 97,000 educators across the state. We appreciate Representative Belton bringing this bill forward as we start to hear the discussion about how we can recruit and retain more educators. It's very encouraging to us that we not only have heard this bill, but also the bill he mentioned about return to work in the TRS system. So we stand ready to help on any version of the bill that the committee sees fit. We support the current version, but we also support Chairman Martin's idea of maybe providing more of an incentive kind of program than loan forgiveness. So we appreciate the conversation, and we stand ready to help as we can.
Again, thank you for coming today, and I challenge you to continue that support over with Chairman Knight's Appropriation Committee. If this is something that moves forward, it's gonna be time, as the gentleman said in the movie, to show us the money. So we're going to do that. Yes, sir. Thank you. Any questions of the gentleman? If he would stand for questions. You got one. Do you mind? I volunteered you, if you don't mind.
And hopefully it's quick. I just want to clarify, you represent the interests of teachers, including teachers who are currently employed in schools, and you would still support an incentive program where those current teachers would not necessarily qualify, because the need is great enough that it's worthwhile for us to incentivize new teachers with things that we haven't for current teachers.
I agree with that, but we also see this as just kind of another tool in the toolbox, so to speak. Crazy lingo like that. Again, with his bill that he has now to kind of incentivize retiring teachers to come back into the profession in some of these high needs areas, we see that as another tool. But we're game to talk about any kind of incentives or ideas or anything that we can do to keep these teachers in the profession, and also to bring to keep the ones that are already there wanting to stay there. So we'll be glad to talk to anyone about this bill and any kind of ideas you have around it. And
Fantastic.
thank you.
That's great news to do that. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Anyone else who wishes to speak? And by the way, I should have said this before the gentleman came up. I will always ask if you will stand for questions. Many times, citizens just come down here. Sometimes you're representing a group like the gentleman was representing Page, but sometimes you're just representing yourself, or you just want to spread something over the committee. Do not feel at all chilled by the fact that I'll ask you if you want to stand for questions if you don't want to. It's not we work for you, so if you want to come up and talk to us, don't feel like you have to stand for questions. We'll do that as you want. Any other further discussion on this? Yes, ma'am. Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll make this quick. So, in thinking about this a little bit longer, is there any way or any language that we can add that just makes sure that there's some type of review of the teachers as they're going through? Because I imagine your first-time teacher, maybe the first year you are maybe a little, you're nervous, your first time in the classroom, but you're really excited about this opportunity. And then, as you teach more, you might come up with, different ways to deliver the material, things like that. Is there anything that we could possibly add that shows that this program is actually working to make the schools better? Like, is this actually giving schools quality teachers, or are we just giving schools?
I'm sorry, I cut you off. But Chairman, let me try that, because I don't know that Representative Belton was here for the last time. I think probably we'll get some information back, some anecdotal information back on the system that we heard from the Professional Standards Commission last year. That'll be something. But you raise a good point, to not just get educators in there, ones that help. So I think that system would help. And I think, again, we go back to a teacher that would be covered under this program is still a teacher in Georgia, is still a professional educator, still has to do all the things that, as if this program didn't have this, just a financial incentive. They still have to do the things, and are judged by their principals and so forth. And certainly that would be measurable, because we would, at least in the aggregate level to this committee, be reported back which ones did well, perhaps not serially, so that, because those things are private amongst educators, but we would be able to get an aggregate group back and trail, if you will, follow the money and make sure we were getting the desired results. People were staying, the turnover wasn't there, and so forth. So if there's not, I know there are other meetings we have to get to. I do want to keep this moving along. I think, Representative, I don't know that we'll have all the questions answered by next week, but I want to ask all the members to have their thoughts on it. The things that I recall seeing is Chairman Jaspers brings back an interesting point about what schools would be involved in, to make sure that we're looking at the turnaround schools and the rural schools. I think we look at when people are there, how long do you stay on the program if you stay there, a variety of things. So Representative Belton, I'll get with you if members of the committee have information. If you have a particular interest in this bill, I may well put an ad hoc group together to work with Representative Belton on refining it. I think it needs that much work. I don't mean you've done a bad job. I just mean it like you said, it's very important and encompassing. So if you're interested in doing that, if you would let me know, I would put that together.
Again, Chairman, I'll defer to the will of the committee. I'm very, very amenable to working on whatever y'all think is best.
And you mentioned several times, I know Mr. Green's here, you don't really have anything we need to add at this point as we refine the how-tos and wheres. If we're basically writing checks you have to cash in terms of identifying and paying these people. So we'll want to involve you in the refinement of the bill at that time, if that's all right. Any further comment or question on this piece of legislation today? If not, we're going to continue to work on this. We'll work with the members of the committee, and we'll bring that back. We have no further business. I do want to remind everyone, if you haven't, please get back to Sarah in our office the personal information, so that if we have information we need to get out, that we would be able to get to you by your cell phone and alternate means that was on that, so that we can put that information together. That said, if there's no further business for the committee, we'll stand adjourned without objection. Seeing no objection, we are adjourned.